Welcome to the Beyond the Bestseller podcast. I'm your host, Kelly Schuknecht, and today's guest is Marlene Wagman-Geller. She is the author of 13 books. One of them was the one that I had found that helped me discover her is Women Who Launch. So let's get started. Well, hello, Marlene. Thank you so much for joining me on the Beyond the Bestseller podcast. I am super excited to talk to you about one book in particular, but kind of all of your books. But would you start us out with just kind of introducing yourself and talking about Women Who Launch and your other books and what led you to write those books?
Sure. So I'm originally from Toronto, Canada, and my childhood Mana La Mancha dream was always to see. I was a huge reader growing up, with the Canadian winters, and you're not athletic, there's not much else I could do. So, there's not that big flight of fancy to reading a book to imagine one day your name on the spine of a book. So I started my journey as a fiction writer, and all I got was rejection notices. So
Mm,
I thought, something, rather than focusing on what you can't do, focus on what you can. So in 2008, I made the transition from fiction to nonfiction.
okay.
And that seemed to be the magic combination. And all those years before I could support myself as a writer, I've always been a high school English history teacher. So that was always my day job, and it was my career and I loved it. But my passion always was writing, and it still remains so.
Now, okay, that's interesting. The switch from fiction to nonfiction. Were you as passionate about writing the nonfiction as you were the fiction?
Yeah, I was, because the bottom line was I love the writing process. It's just so therapeutic, and it gives sort of like a sort of technicolor to the black and white of every day having a writing career. So the venue sometimes isn't the one you initially sought out as your journey.
Yeah.
But who knows, fate has such a fertile imagination. If you're open to opportunity, one never knows where it's going to lead.
Yeah, I love that. So you have how many I had looking at Amazon, it looks like seven, 8 books.
I have 13 books.
13. Oh my gosh. Okay, so
Yeah.
I'm only seeing a snapshot of them here on Amazon. So Women Who Launch is the book that helped me find you because it was perfect for my own journey, and I think the journey of many of the women who will be tuning into this podcast. Tell us specifically about that book and also just why you wrote that. So and I will preface that question with Beyond the Bestseller is the title of this podcast. And the reason I picked that title was because I think that a lot of people write their books for a purpose other than becoming a bestseller, right? What was the real purpose in writing that book, and who did you want to reach and why?
Well, the reason and I love the title of your podcast, because I
Thank
think
you.
that sometimes if we do it for monetary reasons, it's sort of like waters down the real purpose.
Right.
And the motivation behind, well, sort of the launching pad for women to launch, so to speak, was, so many times history has shortchanged women. And it's almost like, so in the way as I wanted women to sort of get equal footing to men in great, because women have launched some very iconoclastic enterprises, but history hasn't always given them credit. So I sort of wanted to take them out of the closet of history and showcase them. And I'd say half the book was women who started and businesses, like the woman who started Spanx. She had a
Oh yeah.
remarkable journey, because she was working as on Disney as a greeter, and because she just couldn't find anything to do. And one day she was just so humiliated. She was wearing goofy ears in Disney, and she saw some of her old former friends from high school, and they had like big power jobs, and she was just so humiliated. But he what's the Shakespearean admonition? He who laughs last laughs best, because she was on Forbes under 40 fabulous billionaires. So, she at the end stood fast to her dream and she succeeded beyond her wildest expectations. So I think one of the things I shared with my students, I always told them dreams don't have to just be for sleeping. And I think with the power of persistence and not listening to the naysayers, we can make it happen.
That's awesome. So I have to admit I have not read Women Who Launch yet, but I cannot wait to read it based on just what you described. Who are some of the other stories, women's stories that you feature in that book?
Well, like I said, some of them were business. So another one that I really liked was it wasn't just launching businesses, it was also launching iconic enterprises. Like, for example, this month we're having the traditional American holiday of Thanksgiving, but we wouldn't have had it except for Sarah Josepha Hale. So, because she was the motivating force behind the National Day of Thanksgiving. So, when she was writing, it was in the midst of the Civil War and everybody, different states were celebrating it in different times. And she contacted President Lincoln, and she thought a unifying force with our very divided country is if we had a unified day of thanks. And President Lincoln concurred. And because of Sarah Josepha Hale, we have a National Day of Thanksgiving. Well, if that didn't make her remarkable enough, she also gave us Mary Had a Little Lamb. And
Oh,
so, so she was an editor of a magazine, a woman's magazine, which was a huge accomplishment in the early 19th century, and based on a true story of a young girl who was actually named Mary, whose lamb actually went to school. She started the nursery rhyme. So I thought, what a great story, from a famous nursery rhyme to a national holiday. But the average person goes, Sarah Josepha Hale, who's she? So I
yeah.
wanted to take her story and others like her out of the closet. So that would be from the different spectrums. One from, a holiday, or another one was a lady who started, Anna Jarvis. She was she was a very loving daughter, and she also thought there should be a day of recognizing Mother's Day. So she started Mother's Day, but what the ironic twist with her story is when Mother's Day started becoming so commercialized with the florists and the candies and the Hallmark cars, she dedicated her life to rescinding Mother's she was a real character. And one of the common denominators with all the women that I profiled, even though they dipped their fingers in so many different pies, they had to have great stories. They had to be characters because otherwise wherein would be the chapter. So it was really, really fun digging through their stories. And so half of the chapter was their stories and half of was their what they launched to make themselves known.
Oh my gosh, I love it. I can't wait to read it. So tell me about you have 13 books. Amazing. One of them is called A Room of Their Own. Tell me about
Yes.
that one.
Well, A Room of Their Own is one of my newest books, and it was based on the title of, well, Virginia Woolf, the famous
Yeah.
British writer.
Yeah,
She'd
that's why it
essay,
caught my eye. Yeah.
A Room of Her Own. And then I thought the same thing is again with the theme of the shortchanging woman. So I thought, people are familiar with all of the great museums of the world, the Louvre, the British Museum, the Prado, etc. But you know what? Their poor cousins are the home museums. And I really think that's a very overlooked niche because while sure it'd be wonderful to go to the Louvre and see the Mona Lisa, nevertheless, it still is a passive experience. You're still staring on the wall of great masters. But if you go to the Woman's Home Museum, like for example, if you go to Louisa May Alcott, who wrote Little Woman, when you
Hmm.
walk through that door, you can see it was almost like you're in the midst of her novel because her mother, and her sisters all became the characters of Little Woman. And you can see where the girls in their infancy put on plays, their gardens, and it was sort of in your home. It's where you truly enter the confessional. And, the photographs that you choose to display or your knickknacks. So I think if you really want to get, so to speak, up close and personal with one of the women famous women of history is to actually go to their home museums. And some of them are very world famous, like Anne Frank's. Okay, so everybody knows Anne's home museum, which must be one of the most emotional experiences.
Yeah.
And the docents of the museums were so nice because I reached out to all of them, and one of them that responded was the curators from the Anne Frank Museum, and they told me some very, very interesting facts that I hadn't unearthed in my research, and so which I incorporated into the chapter. But like some of the museums are very well known, like I said, Anne Frank's. But another one, which I just learned about, which is also in Amsterdam, was Corrie ten Boom.
Okay.
And she also saved Jews during the Holocaust, but she
Mm-hmm.
had a very different story than Anne because she was a Gentile, she was Christian, and her Christian faith told her to hide Jews in her home. So in
Mm-hmm.
her bedroom, she had a secret passage, and she let the Jews live in her home. And when alarm sounded, they actually hid it in a hidden place in her wall. She was discovered, and she spent 2 years in Ravensbrück concentration camp. But I mean, and she's considered with the Jews one of the righteous Gentiles because she and her family dedicated their lives for saving the Jews. So it's in the same city as Anne Frank's, but it was a lesser known museum. And she was just such a remarkable woman.
Yeah.
So what I did with the book, A Room of Their Own, was to showcase women's museums throughout the world in Africa. I don't know if you saw the movie Out of Africa
Mm-hmm.
about Isaac Dennison. She had her home museum in Africa, to the Anne Franks in Amsterdam, also some American ones. Of course, I had to say the Winchester House, the Winchester Museum. So I had a lot of fun unearthing these women's biographies and showcasing their museums because of course, the book can be used in two ways. One, it could be a literal bucket list to actually go to those museums.
Mm.
But failing that weekend, the next best thing would be to read about them.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fascinating. I love how you're sharing these women's stories and how you're using that to inspire women and to just kind of unearth these stories that they're part of our history. And I love it. So you mentioned being a teacher or a professor.
High school teaching.
High school. Okay. Okay.
I moved from Toronto in 1986. I had taught in Canada for many years. And then in 1986, I moved to the States and I moved to San Diego and I
Oh.
taught the border of San Diego and Tijuana. And you know how Dorothy said to Toto, something tells me we're not in Kansas anymore. There's a vastly different teaching experience being on the
Mm.
border of Mexico to the Canadian school. But I did that for many, many years. But one of the messages that I'd like to impart for women who want to start a business is when I started writing in 2008, the worst enemy to accomplishing any enterprise is listening to the naysayers.
Yeah.
And one of the point, in 2008, when I got an idea for a nonfiction book, one of the naysayers just happened to be my husband, and he basically said, if you're going to write a book, you have to have a string of degrees. I have a BA from York in Canada. People say York. They go, you mean New York? I go, yeah, yeah, New York. But it was a no-name university. I have my honors BA and my teaching credential. I don't have a master's or a doctorate. I was working in the context of a full-time job, so time was very finite. So you can't say, well, I'm working.
Yeah.
I can't do it, the old fashioned where there's a will, there's a way. And they said, and then he said, you have to have, well, here's a Yiddish word, schlep. He said, oh, you don't have schlep, you have to have like pull, you have to have some connections, which, I was a little teacher in National City. I didn't have connections. But, I truly believe in the power of persistence. You can achieve your goals. And I think and even if you don't at the end in the final analysis, as you say, well, I gave it my damnedest. And the true failure
Yes.
is not even trying rather
Yes.
than not succeeding. So when my husband said, well, don't quit your day job. And I go, no, I'm not quitting my day job. That was his mantra through all the books. Don't quit your day job. So I said, I'm not quitting my day job. But one of my life's happiest moments was I got a literary agent for my book. And about a week later, I said, does Penguin Publishing, I said to my husband, oh, does Penguin Publishing mean anything to you? And his jaw hit the floor. But the same thing is if you listen to people say, oh, you're Miss Nobody from nowhere.
Yeah.
Well, then you are going to be Miss Nobody from nowhere. But
Yes.
why not try? Why
Yes.
not try?
Yes.
So,
I love that. And yeah, I think that we all deal with the naysayers in whatever we're doing. Oh, I have to show you, but you said San Diego and I was like, this is so meant to be. I've got my San Diego mug. My daughter was at SDSU last year and she got me a San Diego mug when she was there. So um
well,
yeah.
well, well, now you outed yourself because truly, I thought you were in your early 20s. So
Oh, yes,
that
of
would
course.
be
Yeah.
that would be chronologically impossible. So you outed yourself there, but okay, because time sort of forgot you, but okay.
Well, thank you. But yeah, that was my side note. I had to show my San Diego mug, but so you had the experience of writing these books while working full time, and I think that some of the women who will be listening to this podcast might have the dream of writing a book someday to promote whether it's their business, their message, maybe it's just the story they want to get out, whether it's fiction, nonfiction. What advice do you have for women who are trying to do that and juggle all the things?
Oh, okay. Well, in the best of all possible worlds, we would be ladies of leisure and we can wake up and get our San Diego mug or whatever geographic icon is on it. And we would have a day of unfettered responsibility to write. And that might be some people's reality. It was never mine.
Right.
But the thing of it is, everybody has some spare time. So, for example, when I started writing in 2008, my first book, it was called Once Again to Zelda. Time was very finite because I left at 6:45 to, work my job, and I came home at 4:15. I threw some styrofoam box at my husband for dinner, and then I said, well, something, this is my time now from 5 to 8. And I wrote. But in life, to get something, you have to give up something else. So I used to
Yeah.
have friends. I used to watch television. I used to go to the movies. But something, you can't do all that and write and have a full-time job. And do I miss those things? Yes, I do miss those things. In retrospect, would I made the same choice? Yes, I would. Because honestly, writing has meant the world to me. First of all, not only did I achieve my childhood dream of writing the books, but it also did so many unexpected consequences. Like, I mean, such a lovely woman like you who I liked immediately, to be perfectly honest. If I meet somebody and I don't feel comfortable with them, if they ask me my name, I look at them like that's a trick question. But you're so sweet and kind. You immediately put me at my ease. You're a natural born podcaster. I'm serious about that. But the thing is, so you meet so many people that your paths otherwise would not have crossed. Like, I would absolutely never have met you. And at this point, if you ever come to San Diego, we're so
Yes.
meeting.
Yes.
So lucky to be my guest at my favorite seaside restaurant. But I would never have met you had it not been for the books. So not only did I meet lovely people, which I wouldn't have met, not only did I have a realization of a dream, a third thing, it was so many wonderful opportunities. Like one day after my first book, I got to speak at Yale. So now people say, instead of saying I went to Yale, I mean, what a juxtaposition from York in Canada. Well, I went to Yale. They both start with a Y and have four letters. So, why else would I ever have spoken at Yale? And I went on TV shows and radio shows, and none of that would have happened had I not ventured forth. And I think when you are starting off with your enterprise, one thing is that you have to bury is your self-esteem. Because at the beginning, you're going to get rejections, you're
Yes.
going to get doors slammed in your face. But the thing of it is, because when I first got my idea for a book, when you write, you need a literary agent. And I literally got so many rejections from literary agents, and each one was like a serrated knife in my heart. But the same thing is, it's not the ones that reject you that count, it's the one that accepts you that matters. And so, and it only takes one. It
Yes.
only takes one. So you have to put your self-esteem in some hidden dark corner and say, okay, not everybody's going to like you as a person, and not everybody that you write or the business is going to sing to somebody, but you make the connection, and that's what matters. So focus on the one that accepts you, not the 99 that rejects you. That
Yes.
was my motto. So it's a rejection. Okay, that's okay. Next on my list, moving on. And it
Yes.
worked. And it
Yes.
worked.
And I think anyone who is looking to write a book or any, like I'm doing this podcast, right? And there's that fear of rejection. Maybe nobody's going to listen. Maybe nobody's going to like this, right? But you have to just pour your heart into the whatever that project is that you're doing, and the right people will find you, right?
Exactly. It's like when you put your fishing rod in the water, you might catch a weed, you might snag a weed, you might catch a fish. But if you don't put the rod in the water, you know nothing is going to happen. And
Yeah.
nothingness is the worst. Nothingness is even worse than rejection, because a rejection, at least it was something tangible. If you don't
Yeah.
try anything, life is a big, like nihilistic enterprise. So just try and never know what's going to happen.
Yes, I love it. So I have Women Who Launch on my to read list. That is absolutely going to happen. I'm going to read that one. But out of your 13 books, this is just my last question for you to wrap us up. Which book is your favorite that you would want someone to listening to read?
Well, a good mother loves all her children,
Yes.
so analogize. Um, I think um, I think the one that's so hard to say because they're all so different. I think the one that spoke to me the most, well, it might have been my first book, once again, to Zelda, the story behind literature's most intriguing dedications, because it was my first one. But having said that, I did evolve so much as a writer. My most commercially successful book was Women of Means.
Okay.
And what I did for that book was um, people always entranced by the 1% because their lives are absolutely so different than so unimaginable. So what I did in Women of Means, I sort of gave a peephole into these lives of the very wealthiest woman in history. But there was an addendum. It's called Women of Means, Poor Little Rich Girls. So it was the ones that the women whose personal happiness was not equated to their wealth. So it just shows, yeah, we might think, oh, wouldn't it be loverly, in the words of Eliza Doolittle, oh, wouldn't it be loverly? But these women did have these unimaginable amounts of wealth, yet it didn't keep,
Yeah.
heartache at the door. So, that's the spectrum for my first one, where I was a novice, but it brought me into that one was the most successful. And also, I do like the room of their own. And just as an adjunct, it was so odd, is because when I sold Women of a Room of Their Own, this company in the Northeast, the Northeastern states, they bought the book too, but it's called Women's Home Museums of the Northeast, a guidebook. And it was Women's Home Museums just of the Northeast. So it's like all of a sudden I wrote 70 chapters on home museums. So like it's like everything you wanted to know about home museums, but afraid to ask, send them my way. And before we wrap up, on my website, which
Yeah.
is marlenewagmangeller.com, there's an email box. So if any of the listeners want to ask me any questions, like how to obtain a literary agent or how to write a query letter or anything, I'm an email addict, and I'll get back back to them right away. It'd be my pleasure to answer anybody who emails me, or I'm on Facebook, any venue they want. I'd be just more than happy to, communicate with them.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I will include a link to that, to your website, in the show notes for the podcast.
Okay.
So anyone listening can go there to find that. And also I'll list out the books that you have as well, so that people can see all of them, because we didn't have enough time to talk about all of them, but
Oh,
we'll list them out. And yeah, I can't wait to read Women Who Launch. And I do book reviews on my blog, and also on TikTok. So I will be sure to review that book as well. I love reviewing books for authors, and I will share all of that with you. So
you can double as a marketer. You're hired. You're hired right away, because marketing is my Achilles heel. So if you switch hats, let me know. I'd love to.
well, thank you so much for being on, Marlene, and can't wait to read your book. Thanks
Oh, thank
for
you.
being
So
here.
nice meeting you virtually to one day in person.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Looking
Bye-bye.
for a community of women writers to support and inspire you on your journey? Join the Author Power Circle. Connect weekly with fellow authors, stay accountable, and move your book forward in an encouraging community. Learn more at kellyshuckneck.com